Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matthew Prime.
And I'm Adam Zillis.
This is the scourge of fentanyl, and together we are going to navigate through it by discussing the considerations and the solutions to combating this epidemic. We're going to begin by discussing the background. We are then going to move into our SSU Armor Initiative and plan for implementation here on campus. After that, we are going to address and confront the risks we might face, and then we will conclude by wrapping it all up in our conclusion. I'm now going to pass it off to my partner Adam, who's going to lead us through the background.
Thank you, Matthew. In the past year, on the SSU campus, we have tragically lost 2 students to fentanyl poisoning. Both of these deaths were the result of fentanyl-laced counterfeit Xanax. This is the reason we have been called here today, to confront the opioid overdose epidemic and take into account both harm reduction and abstinence-based approaches. I will now be passing it over to Matthew to talk about key stakeholders.
Thank you, Adam. We must consider a variety of stakeholders when implementing a solution. The first and most important are SSU students, families, faculty, and staff. Additionally, we must consider the perspectives of campus safety resources, the Florida Council on Opioid Abatement, and counseling resources. Within our stakeholder group of SSU students, we have identified an additional stakeholder group that we must consider. These are students who use illegal drugs or may suffer from substance abuse issues. We have identified these students as our ultra-vulnerable stakeholders. We will now move into addressing the legal, financial, and ethical implications that we must consider. First are the legal issues. Our solution must fall within the guidelines set forth by the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act of 1989. Additionally, our solution must consider the privacy rights of SSU students, and particularly their Fourth Amendment right regarding unreasonable search and seizure. And finally, our solution must take advantage of Good Samaritan policies and be in line with the state of Florida's Good Samaritan policies to effectively encourage bystander intervention in potential overdose situations. Looking at the financial issues, we're going to compare the financial costs of zero tolerance and harm reduction-based approaches. Based on our research, we estimate that it will cost roughly $100,000 to $200,000 per officer per year for SSU to implement a zero tolerance policy. This is not including the astronomical societal costs associated with these policies. Next, we can look at the cost of harm reduction, where we estimate that harm reduction strategies will cost SSU $1 to $1.6 million. And this is based on provisions like education, training, rehabilitation programs, and naloxone and fentanyl test strips. We can now move into our discussion of the ethical issues we must face. Student well-being is the foundation of our ethical issues, and particularly we must find a balance between the lives and livelihoods of SSU students. This is especially relevant for our ultra-vulnerable stakeholders. Additionally, we must implement a solution that is equitable, as zero-tolerance policies disproportionately affect minority communities. And finally, we must find a balance between normalization and stigmatization of drug users, as we want to encourage our ultra-vulnerable stakeholders to seek the help they need. Now that we've considered all 3 of our issues, we can get into our solution, the SSU Armor Initiative. ARMOR, which stands for Awareness and Response Measures for Opioid Resilience, is our 2-step approach to addressing the scourge of fentanyl here on campus. The first step means the wide distribution of naloxone and fentanyl test strips around campus and stocking it in high-traffic areas. Looking at the long-term sustainability of our solution, we seek to address this through education, training, and rehabilitation for students caught with opioids. In this education and training, all students, staff, and faculty will be required to learn the causes of fentanyl overdoses and how to respond in these situations. And finally, we must consider the potential for government funding to support and offset the costs of our Armor Initiative. Now, we are going to move into the issues that our solution addresses. Our Armor Initiative confronts the astronomical societal costs of zero-tolerance policies while taking advantage of the high value of harm reduction approaches like naloxone. Additionally, it seeks government funding to help offset the costs. Looking at the legal issues, our Armor Initiative will protect students' privacy rights by avoiding unreasonable searches and seizures. It takes advantage of Florida's strong Good Samaritan policies, which will protect bystanders in the case of intervention. And additionally, it is legal and viable through the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. Looking at how our solution is equitable and ethical, we can compare it to a zero-tolerance policy. Zero-tolerance policies are disproportionately affecting minority communities. They do not protect our ultra-vulnerable stakeholders, as they stigmatize the use of drugs, preventing them from getting the harm they need. Our SSU Armor Initiative will apply the same disciplinary policy to all students, making it equitable while providing the resources needed to students to protect our ultra-vulnerable stakeholders, avoid the risks of stigmatization without normalizing drug use. I'm now going to pass it off to Adam, who's going to walk us through our plan to put on our armor.
Thank you, Matthew. Now that we know what the SSU Armor Initiative is, we're going to talk about how to implement it on the SSU campus. Behind me is a Gantt chart we have created to show how we want SSU to implement our initiative, starting with issuing legal statements condemning drug use, which will add to the university's external documentation on drug use. We will also hire or implement staff to run our SSU Armor program. We will procure and distribute naloxone and fentanyl test strips at high traffic areas, which we ensure students know about, to make sure that students have access to them when needed. Then we will go into our training and education aspect of our initiative, starting with faculty over the summer and moving into students when they return for the fall 2024 semester. Any new students and faculty will go through the same education and training when they reach the campus. Moving on to potential risks that we have identified for our initiative. We understand that some students may be wary of mandated treatment. We understand that naloxone expiration is an issue we have to pay attention to. And we also believe that it's important that the university considers the public perceptions and the resource allotment of our initiative. So moving on to how we are going to mitigate these risks. We suggest an annual review period where any naloxone that is expired or used is replaced by fresh naloxone, allowing students to have it whenever they need it. We suggest that any students that are mandated treatment should go through a clinical evaluation first to ensure that nobody is forced into something they don't need and they are able to get the help they do need. We suggest that the university conducts a cost-benefit analysis of our solution and sees how it is more financially responsible than a zero-tolerance approach. We also believe that the university should conduct a campaign, an awareness campaign, showing the risks of opioid epidemics and the overdoses on campus for not just students, but also faculty and the surrounding community members. I would like to move on and reiterate our solution, which is a two-step process, first focused on stopping any future deaths and continuing that through training and education. Thank you.